This story is titled, "My Boss Tried to Force Me to Work Overtime for Free, so I Exposed His Exploitation and Got Him Shut Down." Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Chicago. For as long as I can remember, I've been a hard worker. I take pride in what I do, and I've always believed in putting in the effort to achieve my goals. But there's a difference between working hard and being taken advantage of. And unfortunately, I had to learn that lesson the hard way. It all started a little over a year ago. I was working as a project coordinator at a small marketing agency. The pay wasn't great, but I loved the work, and I believed in the company's mission. Plus, I had dreams of moving up the ladder, and I was willing to put in the time to prove myself. My boss, Jason, seemed supportive at first. He was one of those charismatic, smooth-talking types who always knew how to spin a situation in his favor. At first, everything seemed normal. Jason would occasionally ask me to stay late to finish a project or to jump in on a last-minute task. I didn't mind. I wanted to be seen as a team player. But over time, those requests became more frequent and less like requests. "Rachel, we need this done tonight," he'd say casually as if it were no big deal. "It's all hands on deck." I started noticing a pattern. The workload was increasing, but my paycheck wasn't. I was putting in hours of unpaid overtime, sacrificing my evenings and weekends and getting nothing in return. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that things would even out once we hired more staff or finished the big projects we had in the pipeline. But they didn't. The breaking point came when Jason called me into his office one Friday afternoon. He had that fake smile plastered on his face, the one he used whenever he was about to drop a bombshell. "We've got a big client presentation on Monday," he said. "I need you to pull together the deck, organize the data, and finalize the graphics. It's going to be a long weekend, but I know you can handle it." I blinked at him. "This weekend?" I asked. "But I already put in 50 hours this week, and we don't even have the final data from the client yet." Jason waved his hand dismissively. "It's not about the hours, Rachel. Now, it's about the team. We all have to make sacrifices for the greater good." That was the moment I realized he wasn't just pushing me, he was exploiting me. I decided to push back just a little to test the waters. "Okay," I said carefully. "But will there be any overtime pay for this? It's a lot of work, and I want to make sure I'm being compensated fairly." Jason's smile vanished. He leaned back in his chair and gave me a look that sent a chill down my spine. "Rachel," he said slowly, "this is the kind of attitude that holds people back. If you want to succeed here, you need to show initiative. You need to go above and beyond without expecting a reward every time. That's how you earn respect." I left his office feeling angry and confused. Was I really the one in the wrong? Was I being selfish for wanting to be paid for my time? I spent the entire weekend working on that presentation, but the resentment in my chest grew with every hour I spent in front of my computer. By Monday morning, I was exhausted both physically and emotionally. Jason, on the other hand, was all smiles as he presented my work to the client. He didn't even acknowledge the effort I'd put in. That's when I knew something had to change. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to the way Jason ran the company. I wasn't the only one he was exploiting. My coworkers, especially the younger employees, were all being pushed to their limits without proper compensation. It wasn't uncommon to overhear someone venting about their never-ending workload or their shrinking paychecks, but no one ever did anything about it. "Why don't you stand up to him?" I asked one of my colleagues, a graphic designer named Sophie, after she'd spent an hour complaining about Jason's demands. She gave me a bitter laugh. "Because it won't change anything. He'll just find a way to make your life miserable until you quit. And honestly, I can't afford to lose this job right now." That response hit me hard. I felt the same way. Trapped. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that Jason was counting on that fear. He knew we all needed our jobs, and he used that to keep us under his thumb. I decided I wasn't going to let him get away with it any longer. I started documenting everything. Every time Jason asked me to work overtime without pay, I wrote it down. I kept copies of emails, messages, and project files that showed just how much extra work I was doing. I also started researching labor laws, and I was shocked to learn just how many rules Jason was breaking. For example, in our state, employees were entitled to overtime pay for any hours worked over 40 in a week. Jason's constant demands for unpaid weekend work? Completely illegal. But he made it sound like it was just part of the job, and most of us didn't know any better. As I gathered evidence, I started to feel a spark of hope. Maybe I couldn't change Jason's behavior on my own, but I could expose him. I could make sure he faced consequences for what he was doing. My chance came sooner than I expected. One morning, Jason announced that the company had landed a massive new client, a deal he claimed would put us on the map. He called an all-hands meeting to celebrate, and I couldn't help but notice how he framed the success. "This wouldn't have been possible without everyone's hard work," he said, beaming. "I know I ask a lot of you, but it's because I believe in this team. Together, we're unstoppable." The room erupted in polite applause, but I could see the exhaustion and frustration on my coworkers' faces. They weren't celebrating. They were barely holding on. That night, I made my move. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Labor, outlining everything Jason had been doing. I included all the evidence I'd collected: emails, timesheets, project files, and even recordings of some of our conversations. I was nervous, terrified even, but I knew it was the right thing to do. The investigation began quietly. Inspectors came in under the guise of a routine audit, asking questions and reviewing records. Jason didn't seem too concerned at first, but I could tell he was starting to sweat when the inspectors started interviewing employees. "Just answer honestly," I told Sophie when she confided in me about being nervous. "You don't have to do anything except tell the truth." And the truth was damning. As the investigation unfolded, the atmosphere in the office grew increasingly tense. Jason started acting paranoid, constantly asking people what they were talking about and snapping at anyone who didn't immediately respond to his emails. He even called an emergency staff meeting, claiming it was just a routine check-in, but it was obvious he was fishing for information. "I know there's been some scrutiny lately," he said, pacing in front of us like a caged animal. "But let me remind you all that this company wouldn't exist without teamwork and trust. If anyone has concerns, I expect you to come directly to me, not to outsiders." His words sent a chill through the room, but I could see the cracks forming. My coworkers weren't as intimidated as they used to be. Some of them even exchanged knowing glances, as if they were silently encouraging one another to stay strong. The breaking point came when the Department of Labor sent their findings to Jason. It turned out my complaint wasn't the first one they'd received about him. Over the years, other former employees had tried to speak out, but without solid evidence, their claims had gone nowhere. My detailed records, combined with testimony from current and past employees, finally gave the investigators what they needed to take action. Jason's reaction was explosive. He stormed into the office one morning, slamming doors and shouting about disloyalty and witch hunts. He demanded to know who had reported him, but no one said a word. For the first time, his power over us seemed to be crumbling. A few days later, the company was hit with multiple fines for violating labor laws. The inspectors uncovered years of unpaid overtime, falsified records, and even instances where Jason had misclassified employees to avoid paying them benefits. The fallout was swift and brutal. Clients started pulling their contracts, unwilling to be associated with a company under investigation. Employees began quitting in droves, and even Jason's closest allies started distancing themselves from him. Within weeks, the once thriving agency was a shell of its former self. As for Jason, he tried to spin the situation, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign, but no one was buying it. He was forced to step down as CEO, and the company eventually shut its doors for good. I wish I could say I felt sorry for him, but the truth is, I didn't. He had built his success on the backs of hardworking people, exploiting their dedication and manipulating their fear. He deserved every consequence that came his way. When the dust settled, I found myself at a crossroads. I was out of a job, but I wasn't scared. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free to pursue opportunities that aligned with my values. Free to work in an environment where my contributions would be respected and fairly compensated. To my surprise, many of my former coworkers reached out to thank me. Some of them even shared stories about how they'd found better jobs with healthier work environments. Knowing that I had helped create positive change made all the stress and fear worth it. In the months that followed, my life took on a new rhythm. I had some savings to fall back on, so I decided to take my time searching for my next job. It was liberating to no longer be under Jason's thumb, and I promised myself I would never settle for a workplace that didn't respect its employees. Word of what had happened to Jason spread quickly in our industry. It turned out that his reputation wasn't as sterling as he'd made it seem. Former clients and partners came forward with their own stories of questionable business practices. One former employee even shared a story about how Jason had tried to pay him in gift cards instead of wages, claiming it was an incentive program. The more I learned about Jason's past, the angrier I became. He had been exploiting people for years, hiding behind his charisma and excuses, but now he was finally facing the consequences of his actions. One day, I received an email that brought everything full circle. It was from a former coworker, someone I didn't know very well, but who had been at the company during the investigation. "Hi, Rachel," it read. "I just wanted to say thank you. I know you were the one who spoke up about Jason, and I can't tell you how much that means to me. You gave me the courage to leave a toxic job and find something better. I'm finally happy at work again, and it's all because of what you did. Thank you." I stared at the screen, tears welling up in my eyes. I hadn't realized how much of an impact my actions had made. It wasn't just about holding Jason accountable. It was about empowering others to stand up for themselves, to demand better, to believe that they deserved respect and fairness. As for Jason, the last I heard, he had tried to start another company, but no one wanted to work with him. His name had become synonymous with exploitation and greed, and he was forced to retreat from the industry altogether. Looking back, I don't regret a single thing. It wasn't easy to stand up to Jason, to risk my job and my reputation, but it was worth it. If I hadn't spoken up, he would still be exploiting people, still getting away with his unethical practices. To anyone out there who feels trapped in a toxic work environment, I want you to know this. You have the power to make a change. It's not easy, and it might not happen overnight. But you deserve to be treated with respect. Don't let fear silence you. And if my story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.